Welcome to the Patel Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Harsh Patel. I have obtained a bachelor's degree in neuroscience and minors in biology and biochemistry. Through that education, this podcast allows me to deliver proper health, science, and self-improvement information to the people around the world. If you have liked any of my guests and any of my podcast episodes, the only way to show support to me and my guests is by subscribing to my YouTube channel and the social media platforms of theirs. You don't really want to miss out on any of the highly intellectually stimulating conversations that we'll be having in our future episodes. Today's guest is Dorian Soanes. Dorian Soanes is a registered nutritionist in the UK. He helps people with chronic conditions and reverses those symptoms. Our conversation was absolutely epic. We talked about different thyroid issues, and he gave us complete, understandable mechanisms of the thyroid systems and what goes wrong in the thyroid diseases. You can find Dorian on Instagram at summit__health. He has an absolutely educational Instagram. And now my conversation with Dorian Soanes.
Thank you for having me.
How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. A little bit busy, so I'm flustered. I'm literally jumping from call to call today, so I've had no time in between.
Okay, that's great. If the time is quick, we can definitely pump out some nice information for people, and just let everyone know who you are and what you do, and then we can start with our subject.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So as you said, my name is Dorian. I'm a nutritionist registered here in the UK, and I'm practicing functional medicine. So like root cause medicine, where we're looking for what's behind your symptoms or condition, and I'm helping people to improve or reverse chronic symptoms or conditions like autoimmunity, gut issues, or histamine issues.
Okay, that sounds really good. So you have a lot of experience and a lot of experience in terms of preventing symptoms and even reversing symptoms. So
that's right.
My whole topic of this podcast was how should we improve thyroid issues through nutrition? And before doing that, do you mind taking us through like what is a good thyroid system? Like how does it function optimally? And what are some different or common thyroid diseases that you see in your experience?
Right. Excellent. Great question. So your thyroid, obviously, it's a gland that looks like a butterfly, and it's shaped just below your Adam's apple. You can actually see your thyroid, and if you tilt your head back and you swallow a glass of water or swallow, you'll see it moving up and down. So you can see, and if it's healthy, it's going to be shaped like a little butterfly, with each lobe is about the size of a teaspoon. So like 2 teaspoons there if it's healthy. And it's a super important organ because it makes thyroid hormone. The system is on this negative feedback loop with your pituitary gland. So your pituitary gland is in the base of your brain, the base of your brain stem there. And that secretes something called TSH, or also known as thyroid stimulating hormone, which does what it says. It attaches to receptors, thyroid stimulating hormone receptors on the thyroid tissue. And that tells the thyroid to secrete thyroid hormone. So the thyroid actually primarily secretes a hormone known as T4. Now, T4 is not active. You don't actually use T4. T4 is if you like to think of it, there's 2 thyroid hormones. There's T4 and there's T3. T4 is like your bank account. That's like your savings. It's not active. T3 is like your wallet. That's ready to go. That's the stuff that you're actually spending. So the T3, your body, and actually your liver is massively involved in thyroid function. Your liver and other cells in your body are able to convert the T4 into T3. The T3 attaches to thyroid hormone receptors on your cells, and that tells the cell to metabolize. And just to give an indication of how important thyroid hormone is, there's only 2 things in your body that every cell in your body has a receptor for. One of them is vitamin D, and the other one is thyroid hormone. Because every cell in your body has to be, hormones are signaling molecules. And the thyroid hormone, when it attaches to a receptor, is signaling for that cell to metabolize. So it's literally telling your body to work. Does that make sense?
That's actually the best summary that I've gotten for the thyroid system, because it's a lot going on, and like the general public really might not have a idea how everything works. So that's great. So what did you mention about vitamin D? I kind of missed that point.
So I was just saying that I was using it to emphasize how important thyroid hormone is. Every cell in your body has receptors for hormones, but they don't have receptors for all hormones, right? but every cell in your body has a receptor for thyroid hormone. So because every cell needs to be told to metabolize, and they also have a vitamin D receptor for other reasons, obviously, because vitamin D has various functions. But yeah, every cell has a thyroid hormone receptor.
Okay. That's amazing, because I made a video on YouTube about the important benefits, or the importance of T3, and how it kind of does this overall job of regulating your BMR, and also
totally, yeah.
And so how does like T3, so what are the overall effects of like T3, a healthy T3 levels?
That like you said, that is literally your metabolism. Obviously, you are an organism. Everyone listening to this is an organism, but you're made up of cells. And cells, I mean, we've evolved to be multicellular organisms. There's many multicellular organisms, but there was a time on the earth when there were only single cellular organisms. At some point, cells learn how to work together to create a multicellular organism. And the cells are almost like individual organisms in and of themselves, right? So T3 attaches to a receptor on your cell and literally tells your cell to work. So all hormones, like I said, are signaling molecules, and they work by the hormone is the key and the receptor on a cell membrane is the lock. Cells have receptors to certain hormones. Cells protect themselves with this phospholipid bilayer because they don't want constant exposure to signals from hormones or elements in your body. That's how they protect their own environment. When they have the receptors on their phospholipid bilayer, the hormone as the key attaches to that lock, and that literally tells the cell to do something. So, for example, in your muscle cells have androgen receptors, right? Testosterone, which is also a hormone, if that attaches to the androgen receptor on your muscle cell, we all know what that does, right? Your muscles build. If I inject you with testosterone, you're going to build muscle, right? Signals for you to build muscle. That's what steroids are, right? So the thyroid hormone works in exactly the same way, attaching to that thyroid hormone receptor on the cell, and it literally tells the cell to metabolize. So which means work. That literally means that cell now does its job. So if it's a liver cell, it's doing liver cell stuff. If it's a heart cell, it's doing heart cell stuff. If it's a muscle cell, it's doing muscle cell stuff. Whatever that is, all these cells have different functions. But that thyroid hormone is literally telling them to metabolize energy or work, right? So they will not work without it. So when you have low thyroid, for example, you will have a slower metabolism, which means all your cells are working at a suppressed rate, which means that your BMR is lower, right?
Okay. So
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So when we talk about metabolism, you're saying if we take a look at let's say like a cardiac cell, so it has to generate a lot of ATP, and so in terms of metabolism, what I'm understanding is the glycolysis rate is faster, or the glycolysis rate is optimal, and citric acid cycle and then all these cellular mechanisms, they are optimally working.
Right. So the electron transport, exactly right. So the mitochondria, which is this powerhouse of the cells, the electron transport chain, right, which is how you literally make energy in your cells, that functions, the trigger that tells all of that to function is your thyroid hormone.
Okay, that's awesome. I feel like I've taken like a little memory lane down on my undergrad, and it's really well summarized, and I'm understanding and following really well. I hope the audience is too, because this is amazing information. So what are some common diseases that you see?
Okay, so the most common that you will see is Hashimoto. So Hashimoto's is the name sounds funny. It's the Japanese name, obviously, because it was named after the doctor, Dr. Hashimoto, who discovered the condition. Like a lot of these diseases, their names are nonsensical. It's just named after the doctor. And so Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition. So autoimmunity, meaning your immune system is making antibodies against your own tissue. In Hashimoto's, your autoimmune system is making antibodies against your thyroid, and that is actually destructive to thyroid tissue, and it causes you to have a reduced output of thyroid hormones. So when you go to the doctor, the first thing people will usually test, just as an aside, you should never test TSH. And so we talked about what TSH does before out of your pituitary. You should never test TSH in isolation because it's a pretty rubbish marker in isolation, but that's what a lot of doctors do. They'll just test your TSH. If you have Hashimoto's, right, forget the symptoms for a second. One of your blood markers is your TSH is going to be elevated. And that's because your pituitary is saying, make thyroid hormone. We want more thyroid hormone. And the thyroid is not responding. So that negative feedback loop is telling TSH to produce more and more TSH. So if your TSH is elevated, that's evidence that you may be hypothyroid, right? If you have a good doctor or endocrinologist and they do a full thyroid panel, which would include free T3, which is that bank account balance hormone, T3 being the wallet, free T4 being the bank account hormone, they will also be suppressed in Hashimoto's. And then, if you go further, you can test for Hashimoto's antibodies, so TPO antibodies and TGO. Although I will say, most people with TPO and TGO antibodies do not go on to develop thyroid disease. It is possible. Antibodies are a risk factor for disease, but they do not determine disease. So just because you have antibodies does not mean you have Hashimoto's. To have Hashimoto's, you have to have antibodies. You have to have the symptoms, which is lethargic, weight gain, hair loss, digestive issues, all kinds of things. And you have to have the suppressed thyroid hormones as well. So antibodies is not sufficient for diagnosis. Actually, you should also have a scan if you want a proper diagnosis. You should have an inflamed thyroid from the autoimmune process. So that would be the most common autoimmune condition of the thyroid, and that would cause hypothyroidism. So which means low thyroid hormones, right? And as I just mentioned, that the symptoms are you are lethargic, you feel very sleepy, you will gain weight easily because your metabolic rate is suppressed. And I'll just say, symptoms seem to come on very individually. Like there are some people where this isn't the case. Like I've known people with Hashimoto's, for example, who struggle to gain weight. I don't have an explanation for that. They have all the other symptoms, but they struggle to gain weight. I don't have a good explanation for that, but it does seem to affect different people differently. So there's the genetic variance there. And then hair loss is common. Dry skin is common. Low appetite, low energy, digestive issues. That's the main. Does that all make sense? That's the main thyroid condition.
Yep. And then what are some other ones that are really
sure
like they're in the population?
So again, the most common issue with your thyroid is that you get low thyroid or hypothyroid. Just Hashimoto's probably accounted for about 90% of hypothyroidism. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So that's the vast majority of thyroidism. You have something called congenital hypothyroidism or idiopathic hypothyroidism, which means you are hypothyroid and we don't know why, right? Maybe you don't have the antibodies. Maybe, you just have, you just tested, you're constantly low thyroid. So there's a number of things that can cause that. There is HPA-T axis dysfunction. So HPA-T axis dysfunction is hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, and thyroid function. Your cortisol, which is like a get up and go hormone from your adrenals, that does work with your thyroid hormone. And they will try and compensate for each other if there is a deficiency on either one, right? So it can be that you can get, if you have got very messed up HPA-T, so chronic stress for a very long period of time, it can affect your thyroid. I will say that's very rare. I don't really rarely see that. What's more common with congenital hypothyroidism is things like nutrient deficiencies, usually coming from like gut issues, right? The most common cause of nutrient deficiencies that I see is people aren't absorbing their nutrients properly because their gut function is poor. And that again is caused by stress, right? Your gut function is from your parasympathetic nervous system. If you're too much in your sympathetic nervous system, your gut you're not going to be making stomach acid. You're not going to be making bile, producing bile or secreting bile, the digestive enzymes, everything you need to digest food. So when that happens, your thyroid is like a really energy hungry, a nutrient hungry organ to do that process. There's actually creating thyroid hormone makes a very high level of oxidative stress, which by the way is why people think like thyroid autoimmunity is the most common autoimmunity, because there's this organ that naturally has a very high level of oxidative stress just doing its job, which makes it more likely to be identified as problematic by the immune system, because obviously oxidative stress is also what happens at the site of an infection as well. So iodine is obviously the main thyroid hormone. It's like a trace mineral that you need to consume. You can't make it in your body. Selenium is important. Selenium is actually an antioxidant, and that works to make thyroid hormone, and it counteracts that oxidative stress in your thyroid. But also all the B vitamins, iron. There isn't a nutrient that isn't important in your thyroid function, to be honest. So nutrient deficiencies is what I usually see with congenital, and it usually happens to later people in life. Most commonly, it happens to women. Thyroid disease is almost more common in women, actually, because there isn't a link between estrogen and your immune system and your thyroid. It happens to people later in life, and it usually happens to women who've had kids, and it usually happens to women who've breastfed. And the reason for that is often iodine deficiency. So your iodine stores, your body is very good, like if not outright deficiency, but maybe insufficiency. Iodine is in foods that in the West, we're not very good at eating. So like if you look at Japan, they have a really high iodine intake because they eat lots of seafood. They eat lots of seaweed, stuff like that in their natural diet. Whereas we don't eat that much here. If you have low iodine through your life, you're probably going to be fine. The body has really good compensatory mechanisms if you're insufficient. But when you have a baby and when you breastfeed, if you have low iodine with a child, there's a well-known thing that can happen is the brain doesn't develop properly. It's developed with a condition called cretinism. So your body's actually really good at prioritizing the baby's development at the expense of your own. So if I can paint a picture that maybe you don't have very high levels of iodine intake, but you just about get by, you have a kid that you then breastfeed, and your body is now prioritizing iodine for building that baby's brain, and also iodine in the breast milk. Breast milk's very high in iodine to allow the baby to grow. You come through that, maybe you do that for 2 or 3 kids, you get to your 50s and 60s, and you're told you have low thyroid, and we're not sure why. That most common cause would be something to do with iodine, just like that. And it's kind of an easy fix. Fix your gut, fix your nutrient levels, and you're going to be okay. Then there's things like thyroid cancer, thyroid nodules. Again, there's arguments of like thyroid nodules are literally outgrowths on the thyroid, and they can be caused by low iodine as well. In some cases, they're caused by high iodine, although I think that's much rarer for most people. I've certainly never seen that. And thyroid cancer is the same. Nodules, there's a risk of nodules, but some nodules becoming cancerous. So that covers basically all thyroid diseases that could put you in the hypothyroid range. Obviously, if you have thyroid cancer, you can have a lobe removed, or you can have a thyroidectomy where you have the whole thyroid taken out, and then you are artificially hypothyroid, and you're going to have to take thyroid medication. That would be everything that you can get for hypothyroidism. And then the other thing that you have to take into account for your thyroid is hyperthyroidism, which is much, much rarer. So if we take, 100% of thyroid disease, maybe 5% is hyperthyroid. So it's much rarer. And obviously that's the opposite. You're now making too much thyroid hormone. And again, the most common cause of that, and it's probably 95% plus, is Graves' disease. Again, named after the doctor who discovered the disease, Robert Graves. This is what got me into nutrition, because this is what I was diagnosed with. So Graves' disease, your immune system is now attacking your thyroid, but it's making antibodies known as TSH receptor antibodies. So this mimics the hormone TSH. It sits in the TSH receptor, telling your thyroid to make thyroid hormone. So the symptoms of Graves' disease is opposite to hypothyroidism. So you lose weight, you feel very anxious, you can't sleep, insomnia, your metabolism is going super fast. Some people get something called thyroid eye disease, and it's not really known why, but Graves' antibodies tend to attack the tissue of your eye as well, causing your eyes to swell, and that can make your eyes sort of look swollen. And then for hypothyroidism, more rarer cases of hypothyroidism would be things like you have a hot nodule, which means it's a nodule that's grown on your thyroid that's overproducing thyroid hormone. And in that case, you're probably going to have that lobe removed. So those would be pretty much all the thyroid diseases you can get, I think.
That's amazing. I took a little bit of notes, and it seems like you have covered a lot of information about everything. I have 2 questions of the things you said. First thing is, if you have a thyroid cancer, so in medicine, do they treat the cancer or the actual root of the problem?
No, they don't treat the root of the problem. So thyroid cancer is a funny one because there's no such thing as a good cancer, right? But thyroid cancer, not all, it depends. Like most common kind of thyroid cancer, papillary thyroid cancer, is very slow gut growing. It's unlikely to spread to other tissues. It's not as scary as other forms of cancer. And the modern medical establishment would say there is no known cause of thyroid cancer. So, if there's no cause, we can't treat the root cause. I would say, thyroid cancer is certainly not something that I specialize in, but cancer is an immune deficiency. There are several steps that have to go wrong in the immune system for you to start growing cancer cells. Basically, there is a something missing where apoptosis is not happening where it should be, and old cells or senescent cells are not being killed in the way they should do. And that, if you can get to the bottom of why that's the cause, then we have your answer. But like with cancer, it can be things like radiation is super common, even very low levels of radiation. So areas where you have certain rock types, even there's higher rates of cancer. So that's not necessarily something you could do about. But iodine deficiency is a big one for thyroid cancer as well. Like if you're iodine deficient, you're at a higher risk of thyroid cancer. In some areas where there's excess iodine, so Iceland and Japan, they track higher rates of thyroid cancer. So even high exposure to iodine might also be a problem for thyroid as well. Although those studies are confounded by the fact that there's high background radiation in those because they're volcanic in those countries. So the medical establishment's view for thyroid cancer would be to chop it out. And actually, depending on the type of cancer, there are some rarer thyroid cancers that are aggressive. Once you're at that stage, that's probably because getting rid of your thyroid, I don't think it's ever advisable unless you absolutely have to, but there is a good solution for that. So thyroid hormone is a good solution for not having a thyroid.
Okay. So yeah, so my next question was like, what are the options for treatment if you take out the thyroid gland? Like what does the patient have to do?
Yeah, so that you got to take thyroid hormone. So thyroid hormone it's best not to think of it as medication because it's not. It's actually hormone replacement therapy, right? When you take thyroid hormone, you are missing a hormone and you are taking it to replace that hormone. So literally HRT. And the main option is levothyroxine, right? That's basically pharmaceutical artificial T4. So you take that T4 and your body still has the ability to convert that T4 into T3. And that works for most people. Like for 80% of people, T4 only therapy is super effective. You can feel normal as long as you address any other underlying root cause this is, right? A lot of people fix their thyroid hormones through medication, but they still have thyroid symptoms. And then we've got to look at other stuff. We've got to look at your gut. We've got to look at your stress response, stuff like that, which is actually a big part of what I help people with. Most of my thyroid clients come to me and they've already normalized their thyroid hormones. So it's other stuff we have to work on. But all of that aside, if you have everything else is working perfectly and you normalize your thyroid hormones with medication, you're going to feel fine. For 20% of people, T4 only therapy isn't going to cut it. And that's because they are hyper responders to making something called reverse T3. Okay. And reverse T3, like again, so I said a bad doctor will just do TSH. A good one will do TSH, free T3, T3, T4. An awesome doctor will do that plus reverse T3. No one ever tests reverse T3. And reverse T3 is actually super important to know, especially if you're medicating, right? Not as important to know if you're not medicating. If you're important to know, I'd say if you're medicating to fix your thyroid hormones, I'd say it's essential. And that's because you don't have to make T3 out of T4, right? The body has a choice. It can make T3 or it can make reverse T3. Now, reverse T3, if you look at it, is a mirror image molecule of T3, very similar, and it can fit in the T3 receptor on a cell, right? However, T3 is active and reverse T3 is not active. So reverse T3 blocks T3 from working. In other words, it slows your metabolism. So you might think, why the hell would the body do this? This sounds like a crazy system. And the reason is it's a defense mechanism against times of famine. It's a mechanism to slow down your metabolism if we're going through famine or infectious disease, where having a slow metabolism is going to be a benefit to your survival, right? So stress will increase your reverse T3. Now, some people seem to be, whether there's a genetic predisposition or maybe it's something in their life, the stress in their life, hyper responders to producing reverse T3. Now, if you have someone who is making more reverse T3 than T3 from T4, what's going to happen if you increase their T4 medication? They're going to feel worse, right? Because now they're making more reverse T3. They're blocking more thyroid receptors. So they actually, even though they're taking more T4, they get more hypothyroid. And a lot of people, if you're not with a good practitioner, is going to be, oh, you're increasing your dose, your T4 looks great. I don't understand this. And it will be because the reverse T3 is blocking it. So for those people, T3 as well as T4, that 20% population, who I have a bias sample size, because people who come to me, it hasn't worked with their doctor, right? So I have a bias sample size where probably 50% of my clients benefit from T3 as well. Whereas I think in the general population of hypothyroid people, it will only be 20%. But again, I'm a biased sample. So yeah, for those, they'd have to dose T3, and T3 has a short half-life, so you probably have to dose T3 through the day. Like you probably have to take more than one dose, one or two or three doses through the day.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that was my next question. Like, what if we take T3, like
Yes,
instead of T4? Then
So then that's a great question, and I've sort of covered some of it there. But the problem, the great thing about T4 is it's a slow half-life, slow releasing. You can just take this one pill a day. T3, you low half-life, you go through it quickly. You've got to dose through the day. That's the thing. So I actually, I can't prescribe medication, obviously, because I'm not a doctor, but I do use natural desiccated thyroid. And natural desiccated thyroid is what they used to use for hypothyroidism before they managed to isolate, and make this artificial thyroid hormone from pharmaceutical companies. And some doctors, not all, some doctors will say they don't like Armour Thyroid is one of those. Armour Thyroid is a really good brand. Metavive is the one that I use that's in the UK. This is literally desiccated pig, or you can get cow, bovine, you can get porcine, bovine thyroid. And it will literally give you a mix of T3 and T4 thyroid. Some doctors will say they don't like it because it's not regulated. Each desiccated capsule can be slightly different. I think that's kind of splitting hairs. Most people, if it's suitable, people get good results on that. The same as taking thyroid hormone, and then you're just taking sort of desiccated animal organs. So yeah, but you probably have to make allowances from taking a lower dose overall and dosing through the day if you're going to take T3 as well. Okay,
amazing. That's a lot of good information. I've learned. I didn't know what reverse T3 was.
Yeah,
I had no idea that. Well, we learned in organic chemistry there are certain structures that could be opposite in some way. I don't recall the proper word, but that makes so much sense when you said T3 could be as a reverse too in cases where you have to take T4 as medication. I have one question that is leading off to this T4, T3, and reverse T3. If a hypothyroid patient is in a caloric deficit, I have, in my understanding of what's going on with the metabolism, there's something called your defense mechanisms taking place, and they lower your metabolic rate when you are in a caloric deficit. So is there a greater push to lower that metabolism when a hypothyroid patient is lowering that?
That's an awesome question. And I will tell you, this is so much of what I work with my clients with. So you're talking about metabolic adaptation and the ability the body has to metabolically adapt. When someone is hypothyroid, most of the time they've got Hashimotos. Most of the time there's an autoimmune disease at play, right? And there's certain things that have to happen for your immune system you're not meant to get autoimmunity, right? There is a genetic component, but it's like 20-25% of the whole thing. So you have a predisposition. Not everyone with that predisposition gets the autoimmunity, right? There's certain things that have had to happen for you to get to that stage, right? One of them is probably a dysregulated stress response. Okay, your stress response and your immune system work in lockstep. Okay, when your stress response goes up, your immune system is more active, right? The way we evolved is when we're in famine, our stress response is meant to increase because that's a beneficial effect of being in a famine. More cortisol means we break down tissue for energy, which is what we need to get through a famine. If I inject you with cortisol, you're going to feel great, actually. That makes you, it's an anti-inflammatory, makes you feel great, helps you get through a stressful time. Okay, so that's beneficial. That's going to be messed up if you have someone with an autoimmune disease. But it's likely that they've been dinging on their immune system with their cortisol too much for too long because of their lifestyle. The other things that are messed up is probably this is the trifecta of things I usually see that's contributing to autoimmunity. And depending on the individual, they're relevant in varying degrees. So the first one is your stress response. The second one is your gut. So your gut, the reason your gut's so important for your autoimmunity is because most of your immune system, about 70 to 80% of your immune system lives in your gut lining. Okay. And that is because in the environment we evolved in, if we ate something that has a parasite or a bacteria and that got through the gut lining and into your bloodstream, you were dead, right? There's no antibiotics, you were going to die. So the body has evolved this insurance system of all the immune system outside your gut to make sure that doesn't happen. Everything that's in your gut will stay in your gut and they can deal with it in your gut. There's even there's a cell called a dendritic cell, and it looks like a starfish. And it sort of sticks a tentacle through the one cell thick layer that is the lining of your gut, the epithelial cell layer of your gut. And it's like a CCTV, like a camera looking at everything that's going on in your gut, right? And that's communicating to the immune system. Now, if your gut is off, for want of a better term, you've got a bit of dysbiosis. Usually it's an overgrowth because stress will mean that your gut function is not working as well as it should be. When your gut function is not working as well as it should be, you're going to develop an overgrowth because all the defense mechanisms you have for keeping the population in check are now down. The acid is down, the bile's down, food starts to ferment, you start to get bloating because it's fermenting. If your gut's off and your immune system sees that, that is stimulating also to your immune system. That's when you're at risk of having food intolerances or molecular mimicry, where you're actually identifying a food particle erroneously as a pathogen, and then that food particle also looks similar to a body tissue. That's molecular mimicry. So your stress response is off. That can cause your gut to be off. And then on top of that is metabolic health. So we've seen now, like in COVID times, right? Metabolic health is extremely important for your immune system. If you have insulin resistance, your risk of having severe effects with infectious disease are raised because your immune system does not work as well. Your immune system is actually extremely glucose hungry. And if it does not have that ready access to glucose, that's when mistakes can happen. So that's the trifecta: stress response, dysregulated like HPA axis dysfunction, gut issues, and then insulin resistance or metabolic health. Now, if you imagine, right, stress is putting down the gas for the immune system. Your gut, if it's off, putting down the gas for your immune system. And then your metabolic health supplies the fuel to your immune system. And if it's not working as it should be, your immune system is not fueled properly, but there's demand. It's like you're pressing on the accelerator and there's no gas. That's when the mistake of autoimmunity happens. That's the trifecta that leads to autoimmunity. So back to your question is the metabolic adaptation. The reason I went through all of that is because it's the stress response that creates metabolic adaptation. By the time someone comes to you with hypothyroid, the reality is they've probably had years, if not decades, of stress response that has slowed their metabolic rate as a defense mechanism to famine, because that's what the stress system recognizes. It recognizes famine, it recognizes infectious disease, because that's what killed most of our ancestors, right? So that's what we're evolved to face. So by the time they come to you, they're already massively metabolically adapted. You know, most of my autoimmune clients, they've had trauma, divorces, accidents, maybe childhood trauma. They've had chronic stress. Maybe they're working really hard. Or maybe they're just super busy. Maybe they've got lots of kids and they're super busy. They don't have a second for themselves. Maybe they've been on and off diets. They've done crash diets, right? Which is obviously a big stress. They've maybe every January they do a crash diet because they put on Christmas weight, that sort of thing. So when they come to you, they're metabolically adapted, and it's probably not to do with their thyroid. Their thyroid hormone is one thing, but I see that all autoimmune patients, not just thyroid hormone patients, are badly metabolically adapted. They usually don't have the body composition they want in spite of not eating that many calories. So I never try to lose weight with an autoimmune patient off the bat. You've got to unravel all of that. You've got to unravel the stress response. I will reverse diet someone, right? You need to boost their metabolism to get them to a point where they can eat a normal amount of food and still be able to lose weight. So the first thing I would do with autoimmune patients' diets is like, I look at where their protein's at, right? They want to be sufficiently fueled with protein. And then usually I want them to eat more, even if it means short-term weight gain, right? Usually I want them to eat more, because combining that with something like strength training program, where you're trying to get stronger, right? And you're reverse dieting, slowly you're adding a bit of food each week. I like to use carbohydrates, because that's going to fuel your performance. So a bit more carbohydrate, and also most just so happens most Hashimoto's patients tend to be on low carb diets when they meet them. So like something like rice is really good, or something, because it's measurable, right? You add a portion a week and you keep building that up. And before you know it, in 6 weeks, you know, they're eating maybe 600 calories more or something like that, right? Now,
Amazing.
and if we can do that with minimum weight gain, right? And you got stronger, so you built some muscle, now you're in a great place to drop some weight. Does that make sense to you?
Right. That's awesome. You can keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I usually find with Hashimoto's clients. And obviously, are you a trainer? Is that why you're asking that question?
Oh no, I'm not a trainer at all.
Okay. So that's why I a lot of the hypothyroid clients I have been to trainers because they can't lose weight, and trainers will often say, well, it's calories in, calories out, which is true. That is an absolute truth. You just got to cut your calories. And they will feel frustrated because they'll do what they're told, and they'll reduce their calories, and the trainer will, maybe it's not a very good trainer, maybe not a very experienced trainer. The trainer will be cynical that they've actually done what they're told, or won't really believe it's happening. But I've seen this so many times now, right, with people who are really dedicated to their health. Their health is really their 10 out of 10 priority, and they will do exactly what they're told, even at the expense of feeling like crap or at their mental health or anything. That metabolic adaptation is in autoimmune clients, and so gut health clients as well. This would apply to histamine clients, anyone who's got chronic illness. That metabolic adaptation is a real thing. And like, just to let you know, Harsh, like that is a core tenet of like how I work with people. If you can increase people's metabolic rate, I just find that tracks perfectly with increasing their health, right? As you increase that metabolic rate, things have to happen for your metabolic rate to increase. You have to start prioritizing sex hormones over stress hormones, not over, but you have DHEA, which is the precursor molecule to cortisol, all your steroid hormones, so cortisol as well as testosterone and estrogen. Now, you're always making a decision which one to make more of, right? It's very easy to dispense with the sex hormones because they're never essential, especially not to survival. So in stress, you're just going to prioritize stress hormones, forget the sex hormones. But if we're going to increase your metabolism, if you're going to get stronger, right, we need more sex hormones. As our metabolic rate is rising, our body is now registering, oh, we're not in this vulnerable state of famine anymore, right? We don't need to have our gas on the immune system all the time. Let's relax the immune system a bit. So, and obviously involved in that is sleep. Sleep is massive. Stress management, anything that's going to make you sleep better. That's kind of the main thing that I work with people on. So your question was a really good one, because that kind of summarizes how I work with clients.
Yeah, we might have to do a round 2 of metabolic adaptation, because if you have time, because this is such a deep concept that I just learned recently about, and I'm not good at managing stress at this point in my life because I have a lot of things going on, but I'm trying to have this holistic view of health.
Right.
And like you said, improving metabolism and increasing metabolism is just so much healthier about anything, even like maybe losing weight for patients who are hypothyroid. So that is amazing. So yeah, just lastly, let's wrap it up. Where should everyone find you? Your Instagram content is absolutely informational. So much to learn. I could just keep scrolling. Last night I was doing some research on what you had on your page and everything. Then I just learned so much about like hypothyroidism and stuff. And so just tell everyone where they could find you.
No, I really appreciate that. The best place to find me is on Instagram, as you say, and my main account there is Summit_health. So that's the double underscore.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most people miss. So Summit_health, and that's the best place to get my content.
Yeah, okay. That link will be in the description. And lastly, just to finish it off, like you said you have hyperthyroidism.
Yeah, that's what got me into this. So I was, nearly 10 years ago now, I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. I wasn't always doing this. I used to be a ship broker, right, which is buying and selling ships on behalf of my clients, like real estate for ships. And it was shortly after turning 30, shortly after the birth of my first son. I had a lot of stress going on. It was quite a stressful job, and it really shook me. And I spent 2 years almost incapacitated, frankly. And it wasn't until the doctor said, well, we're going to have to take out your thyroid, that I thought, this doesn't make sense. There must be another answer. And that is when I discovered functional medicine. And the rest is history, basically. I haven't suffered symptoms in about 6 years, maybe 7 years now. And, I'm so passionate about it. Obviously, I went and got a master's degree. I got my diploma to practice. I qualified. And that brings me here.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. It's kind of inspiring too that like people who suffer from something, and that's like an inspiration, because that's ongoing inspiration. That's like the fuel every morning. Because when I was a bigger person, and when I lost that weight, like it was just a fuel every day when I look back at my journey to keep going, like keep learning about health and mental health and all the good stuff. So I love that about your journey. This was awesome. I hope we can do a round 2 whenever you have time. Definitely. You have a lot on your plate, man, but it was awesome. The amount of information I've learned in this podcast, the deep dives and the mechanisms, is truly understandable for the general public. It's amazing what you had provided in this episode. Thank you.
Appreciate it. No, thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm definitely down for a round 2, so you just let me know.
That's awesome. See you.